So did you get all Christmased out yesterday? Anybody eat too much? Yeah. Anybody have too many sweets? There's still some left on my counter. I wish you'd come over and eat them, because otherwise I'd have to. And I probably will this week. I know that there are people here who really love Christmas. My mother was one of those. Me, not so much. I'm not a big Christmas person. Maybe you can tell from the title of my sermon. Ba-Humbug. Anyway, I thought I'd play a little trick with you, and I gave you a little Christmas quiz. Actually, I had one that was about 6 pages, but I condensed it down because I didn't want to take all day with it. And I tried to make it as simple as possible with just true and false answers, as opposed to multiple choice or fill in the blanks. I know some of you are visiting from college right now, and you really don't need to take more tests. But it's always fun to do these, because many of us get our theology from Christmas songs and the Christmas plays or the movies that are put on TV. And I just want to check to see where you get your theology from. So we're going to go through these. I got the answers up here. The word Christmas is found in the Bible. How many people think that's true? The word Christmas comes from the Latin Christ's Mass. It wasn't developed until the 7th or 8th century, where it actually derived that term. So if you put false, you're doing good. Actually, I've got the answers up on the screen. Question 2, the New Testament church celebrated the birth of Jesus, and there is a record of it in the New Testament. How many of you thought that was true? It wasn't until the 4th century that the church started to develop a birth celebration for Christ. The first 3 centuries, the church did nothing to celebrate any kind of birth of Christ event. Jesus was born on December 25th, 0000. This is actually a 2-part question. Was Jesus born on the 25th of any year? What day was he born? We don't know. We have no clue. We don't know, and it's interesting how many people will argue to the death that he was born on the 25th. The Bible is silent on the birth of Jesus. Now, the second part is the year 0000. If you go back into chronology, there is no year 000. We go from 1 BC to 1 AD in the timeline. In fact, scholars believe that Jesus was born on or around 4 BC, based on the life of Herod and his death. Herod had died by 4 BC, and he was still alive at the time of Jesus, so Jesus had to die before Herod had to die. So even our timeline of AD BC isn't really directly connected to Jesus' birth. The wise men, or the Magi, arrived at the manger on the night of Jesus' birth or shortly thereafter. What do you think? Come on. Every nativity scene you've ever seen shows the wise men standing next to the shepherds, right? It was probably months after the birth of Jesus that the wise men showed up. In fact, the Bible records that Jesus was no longer in a manger. He was in a house. That's where the Magi visited him. Months after his birth. Not days or minutes, as some would have you believe. The Bible reports that there were 3 Magi that came to see Jesus. The Bible doesn't tell us how many. It says there were 3 gifts. And it does say that there was a plural of the Magi, so that there was more than one. But other than that, there could have been 20 for all we know. There might have been 3, there might have been 6. We have no idea. But popular songs have said, "We 3 kings from Orient are." And there are people who will just fight to the death that there were 3 kings. Okay. Joseph and Mary had to leave Egypt the first week or 2 after Jesus' birth. Well, if you understand that the Magi didn't come for several months, then they were there for a period of time, more than just a couple of days. Jesus was baptized shortly after he was born. This is a trick question. It's a 2-part, first of all. Jesus wasn't baptized as an infant, was he? The Bible said he was dedicated in the temple. And when was he dedicated? According to the law, which was 7 days after his birth. So, I guess a few days, it might be close. The Christmas tree, the wreath, the holly, and the mistletoe all were originally Christian symbols. Yeah, no, not really. In fact, every one of them was derived from pagan symbolism. You need to understand where we get this stuff. I'm not trying to condemn Christianity, but one of the reasons that Christianity gets a bad knock is that we live fables. And sometimes we create the fables. There was no Christmas tree, there was no mistletoe or any of this stuff until after the 1100 AD, when all of these things started integrating into Christianity to become symbols. And of course, we reinterpreted those symbols into some sort of Christianization. Oh, question 9 is offensive. I shouldn't have put that on here. Telling your children that Santa is bringing them presents is not really a lie. I remember after I was, because I was raised in a rather paganistic home, and Christmas was, my mother adored Christmas and treated it like it was the only day of the year. And I can remember how up until about age of 10 or 11, we were still being fully indoctrinated into the Santa Claus thing. After I became an Adventist and my wife talked to me about this whole false representation, we waited until after Christmas, and our kids were maybe 4 or 5 years old, because we didn't want to tell them before Christmas. We waited after Christmas, because all the kids in their school still had some delusions, and we talked to them about this whole Santa Claus thing. And I'm glad we did it when we did, because you know what kids do. They want to run to school and tell everybody, and then if all the other parents get upset with you because you're telling your children the truth as opposed to telling them a lie, and of course then you become the bad guy because you tell their kids the truth. But maybe that's a good reason why I'm doing this Christmas sermon after Christmas, because you got a year to prepare for it now, to think about it. And last one, God is pleased when we spend more time in commercialism than preparing ourselves and the world to receive Jesus at his second coming. I'm not even going to answer that one. Christmas is a humbug. Is it? No. Let's take a look at the pros and cons. First of all, it has the potential to glorify God. It really does have the potential. The question is that does it really glorify God in the way that it is represented today? What are present day realities about Christmas that we in North America experience? Let's take a serious look at it. Now, if your reality in Christmas is based on 20 years ago, North America has changed in its expectations and relationship to Christmas. All you have to do is watch news stories today. People don't want you to say Merry Christmas. They want you to say Happy Holidays. They want to remove all Christianized imagery from Christmas in the workplace and in the schools. And this is happening around us at a rapid pace. That there are grade schools that are refusing to allow children to sing Christmas carols in the schools and have Christmas plays. So 20 years ago, the North American attitude towards Christmas is a lot different than it is in the last 2 or 3 years. Well, let's look at some pros and cons of the whole Christmas concept. We'll start with the positives. People are more open to the language of Christianity at this time of year than almost any other time. It's true. When you say Merry Christmas, the majority of people will acknowledge it and allow you to say it to them, except if you're in a school right now. The other thing that we find is that a lot of the Christmas hymns are with a strong Christian theme, and they're played in secular areas. And so there is the potential for us to use the Christmas time to talk about the birth of Christ, to talk about Jesus Christ. People seem to be slightly more open to it this time of year than at any other time of year. And if rightly done, this would be a positive. Is it rightly done is the question. Non-church attending people are more likely to attend a worship service at this time of the year. It's the second highest worship attending other than Easter. So Easter and Christmas tend to be times that people who don't normally come to church, for whatever reason, maybe they were raised in a Christian home, maybe this is part of their upbringing, they come to church. I have some great memories of church at Christmas time. I can remember going to midnight services on Christmas Eve, in which the church was as full or fuller than ours was last week. They dimmed the lights and they had the big Christmas tree. I remember the Christmas candles. Does anybody, if you were raised in Adventist, you don't know about Advent candles. But Advent candles was a wreath with 5 candles in it, and they were different. They were purple, I think, or blue, until you get to Christmas, which is white. And so every week we'd come to church and another candle would be lit on the Advent wreath. So as a child, you're waiting for that white one because that's payday when that white one's lit. I'm telling you. And for our family, you open Christmas presents on Christmas Day, so you had to endure Christmas Eve service because that was the last thing you had to do before presents. So going to midnight service, and of course, raised in a Lutheran church, it wasn't called midnight mass, but it's similar to the midnight mass. And the music was gorgeous. I just used to love going to midnight service on Christmas Eve. And then, of course, we would go home, rush, and try to go to sleep because we knew what was coming next. So I have positive memories. And there are probably a lot of people who were raised in a Christian home who were taken to church on or around Christmas that have some positive memories. And so they come back to church around Christmas because of those memories. It has the potential to reach people because they show up. That's a good thing. If they're in church, at least we have a chance to share with them the message of Christ. Many families attempt to reconnect at the holidays with family heritage and family memories. And this is a real positive thing, too, getting people together around that don't normally get together during the year. So there's a lot of potential positives in the Christmas holiday. But there are some negatives too, and sometimes we don't want to look at the negatives. Christmas causes more people to overspend their budgets than at any time of the year. In fact, it is said that some people will not pay for their Christmases for up to 3 months afterwards, which usually leads to a lot of debt depression after the holidays. Because we want to do up the holidays so much, not only do we decorate and we have parties, but we have all of these presents that we can't afford. And this isn't the truth when you were raised, because people, if they didn't have the money, they didn't spend it. But today, people have credit cards, and they run up serious amounts of debt around the holidays. And they pay for that for months after the holidays are over. Alcohol consumption increases significantly during the holidays for multiple reasons. Some of it's because of depression. Some of it's because of so-called partying. My son serves as a paramedic in the hospital in Columbia, Missouri, and they dread the holidays. There will be more car accidents. There will be more drunken disorderlies. There will be more calls for him on or around Christmas. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's are the 3 days that they dread as a paramedic on the hospital squads, because of alcohol consumption directly related. The holiday is more about consumerism, Santa Claus, and presents than it is about the birth of Christ. That's the reality. Irrespective of what we think it should be about, this is what it ends up being about. And of course, you all understand that depression increases at the time of the holidays. It's one of the biggest times. In fact, there are more suicides around the time of the holidays than at any other period of the year. Why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. Because sometimes we set expectations so high for the holidays that those people who don't have a family system, or they don't have family traditions, or if loved ones that they used to celebrate with have passed away, they become depressed at this time of year. They avoid coming to church. They avoid contact. They sit at home and drink, and they say, everybody else is having something that I want, and then they decide that it's not worth living anymore, and so they commit suicide. So for as positive as the holidays may be for you, there are a large number of people that the holidays are not positive. There we go, right hand, not left. The stories about the birth of Christ and the significance of remembering it are out of alignment with biblical teachings. All you got to do is watch the movies and listen to the songs, and you listen to it and you kind of cringe a little bit because they're not accurately reflecting the true story as the Bible has indicated it. We have created myths and stories that just don't jive. Do you know what happens when a person who listens to all the stories and all of the movies and stuff around Christmas, and then they actually read the biblical account and they go, oh, well, what's the matter with you Christians? You're being a little duplicitous here, aren't you? You got this story that says one thing and the Bible that says the other. Does that mean that the Bible is just a fable and you can modify it any way you want? That you can tell whatever Christmas story you want to? Because we have gotten so far away from the truth of the birth of Christ. Let me share one. How many times have you seen in a nativity scene or a story, Mary riding on a donkey pregnant? There's a bunch of them. How many of you pregnant women that have been pregnant or are would like to ride on a donkey for several hundred miles just before you're about ready to give birth? There was a woman in my previous church. Her name was Laura. She was from Lebanon, born and raised. She moved to this country in the 1980s. And she has ridden on donkeys, and she has been pregnant, and so she speaks with a little bit of authority. And she scoffs at the mere picture of any pregnant woman wanting to ride on a donkey hours before she's ready to give birth. It ain't happening. But what did we do? We reinvented this beautiful scene. And how often do you see a scene of the nativity scene in which there's this wooden enclosure in this green field with pine trees? If you've been to the Middle East, you know how ridiculous that is. There aren't pine trees, and it's not very green. It's pretty arid and dry and deserty. And there's a good chance, although I can't prove this, that the shepherds kept their sheep and their flocks in caves at night, not in wooden structures constructed by humans. But we have reconstructed the story. We talk about the Christmas season as a season of giving. But is it really? All you have to do is take a look at the ads on TV. And it seems to me that Christmas is more about greed than it is about giving. Do you know if you don't have a new Lexus with a big bow on the roof in your driveway, you're just not with it? Because that's what everybody's getting this year, is a Lexus. Yeah, we do give gifts. But giving is normally done with an expectation of getting something, isn't it? Very seldom do we sit around the Christmas tree and we give and not wonder when I'm getting something in return. And isn't it funny that on the birth of somebody else that we get gifts? I thought the birthday child should get gifts. Isn't that the way we normally do it in our world? But on this particular day, we're going to just kind of set the birthday boy aside, and we're going to give gifts to each other. Seems kind of out of place. Selfishness is displayed at this time a lot more than selflessness. That's the reality of Christmas. And we've built a bubble around it. So let's take a look at true giving. Because the birth of Christ really is about giving, isn't it? And how does God give? For God so loved that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. You know, the mental picture that we have derived from Christmas is not the same picture that I believe heaven has. Because you see, at the night or at the occasion of the birth of Christ, heaven did not view the birth of Christ the same way we do. We see it as something cute, precious. Wasn't this special? I want you to think about how heaven viewed the God of the universe entering into the womb of his creation. The angels, as they watched their military commander entering into this war zone as a helpless baby, how do you think the angels viewed it? With fear and trepidation? The sacrifice of God began through the womb of a young girl. It was not an exciting celebration. In fact, when the angels came to the shepherds in the field, they were aghast that the shepherds didn't understand this monumentous occasion. They were aghast that the world was asleep and not aware that the King of the universe, through something I don't understand, could enter through the womb of his creation with the explicit purpose of coming to save that creation. God gave in a way that we still don't comprehend on that day that Jesus was born. I want to change your view of Christmas morning. It was the greatest sacrifice that has ever been begun in the history of the universe, when God condescended to enter through the womb of his creation. I got a feeling that the angels weren't as excited as what we think they were. I got a feeling that the angels saw this more as a dangerous mission for their commander, as opposed to just a simple baby birth. They understood the great controversy in the battle, and they understood that there was an enemy waiting for this child to be born. That within a few short weeks of his birth, maybe a couple of months, that Herod would attempt to kill Jesus. And that there was an enemy already on the ground preparing the field for battle against a defenseless child. That was the first Christmas, whenever it took place, whatever time of the year it took place. So God gave without conditions. That's not how we give, but that's how God gives. And his gift was to all. It wasn't selective. It wasn't just to the children of Israel. When Jesus was born, he was born into the world to save the world, not a select few who were privileged. And God gave lavishly. There was no greater gift that he could have given than himself. You understand the magnitude of this? Do we think about this at Christmas? Does Christmas drive us to our knees in honor and recognition of the great God of the universe who gave everything for us? The sacrifice began at Bethlehem. Now, we seem to like a babe in a manger a lot because a babe is not threatening. But that babe still was the king. That babe still was the one who was come to conquer death and sin. And even though as a warrior he came born as a babe just as all of us were, he still was a warrior. And he came to fight a battle. God gave lavishly, unconditionally, and beyond our understanding of what giving really is. But how do we give as humans because of our sinfulness? We give sparingly. We give with hooks attached. We give with expectations, conditions. And I'm not just talking about presents now. I'm talking about in general. And sometimes as humans, we don't give at all. We tend to be extremely selfish. We want. And if we give only because we get something in return. So, understanding that I'm talking about next year Christmas, not this year's. Could next year's Christmas be different? What would it look like if God's people who understood his gift gave in the same manner that he did? What if we had a giving heart like God had a giving heart, that we could give lavishly, unconditionally? What would Christmas look like next year? Maybe instead of spending lots of money on gifts that will be returned or never used, we could give more to those who really need something. Maybe we could not go into debt so bad that we get grumpy after Christmas. Maybe we could think about our giving in a whole different aspect as opposed to wrapped presents under a tree. Maybe instead of people becoming depressed during this time of year, they could become joyous by participating in God's attitude of selfless giving. I can remember my mother getting so grumpy because of all of the preparations she had to make Christmas perfect. To the point where it was intolerable to live with my mother because of her intent on making a perfect holiday. Do you understand the oxymoron there? The dichotomy of causing yourself to become so emotionally upset because it's not perfect enough. We see this happen a lot at weddings, don't we? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Bridezillas? Where we spend so much energy and time to make it perfect that we lose the whole attitude of what we're trying to achieve, the whole purpose of what we're trying to achieve. Maybe instead of commercialism gaining the victory financially this season, God's church and his work would become the beneficiary of selfless giving by God's people. Now, you're going to read this and interpret it giving money to the church. And I'm not intending that. I'm going to give you a little different perspective here. I'm not talking about giving your money to the church as much as I'm talking about giving yourself. Wholly, completely. Maybe this year God's people would give more grace and acceptance to others. Maybe we could become a little less judgmental, because we suffer from a serious problem in judging one another. We even judge those who judge. Couldn't we give more grace to each other this year? Couldn't we treat each other with respect and dignity, even if we disagree, even if we don't like how the other looks or acts or talks or walks? Could we be a giving people like Jesus was? Because when he came to this earth, he gave to everyone without condition. If this truly is the season of giving, can we learn how to give like God gave? Can we become different people? Maybe if we attempted to start now, we could learn how to give ourselves totally to God. And not only will our lives be different, but maybe we could make a difference in the world. Instead of arguing in the workplace, in the school about Christmas symbols, maybe we could live the Christmas life of giving, even if people disagree with the symbology of Christmas. Maybe we could live Christmas every day of the year in our hearts and be the kind of Christmas that God intended it to be, instead of an event. Now, I have a little pet peeve with event Christianity. I really do. I don't see it in the Bible, but I see it being lived out in churches of all denominations around the country, where we whip ourselves up to get to the event of the church service or the event of the holiday. But the rest of the time, we live like little demons, treating each other with disrespect, ignoring one another. I really would like to get into the Christmas of a lifestyle as opposed to an event. Go ahead and decorate your houses. Go ahead and have all of the other things, the experiences of the holiday. But there has to be an attitudinal change in God's people to where the holiday actually makes a difference in people's lives. Where they will know we are Christians, not by the holidays we keep, but by how we treat people. Would that be amazing or what? Would that cause the world to stand up and take notice that Christians are different? That maybe we have something more than a silly holiday that we have stolen from the pagans and re-Christianized and changed maybe people would actually want to find out about Christianity because they saw real Christians. People who emulated the life of Jesus Christ. That would be the kind of Christmas I would like to experience. And I wonder why I'd have to wait for one day out of the year to experience it. Couldn't this become a lifestyle that we treat each other with dignity and respect? Now, I know that in 2 weeks you will have forgotten everything I said. That's just the way it works. But it's on YouTube, so you can go back and check it later if you want to. But how could Christmas be different next year if we took the attitude of living God's giving attitude daily and treating people with dignity and respect, treating people with love? I don't know. Maybe I'm just silly in thinking it's possible. Now go ahead, keep Christmas any way you want.